What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. After a 3-week hiatus, I never meant for it to be a 3-week hiatus. You know, I talked about at the time I was doing the top 25 players of the 2010s and the top 15 players of this current decade, and I was talking about how this summer was going to be a breakdown of those top players of the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, so on and so forth. I was going to be breaking down those lists consistently. Well, I've been slacking, but I'm hoping at some point this summer and heading into the fall, still during the offseason, before Countdown to Craziness, anything like that, to get through those lists and to get that top 100 list out. It's been 3 weeks since I last recorded. There's been some birthdays, some stuff going on in the family, some job interviews for me. You know, it's a big time in my life right now. Having just graduated, and I've talked about that. But what I kind of want to do is I'm going to sit here and talk on the mic for a good long while. And I'm going to kind of do a off-season banter part 1 that's dropping as you're listening to it on Thursday, on July 4th, actually, on Independence Day. And then part 2 of this discussion is going to drop on Tuesday, which I guess is July 9th. So there's a lot to talk about. I mean, as I said, it's been 3 weeks since I did an episode here. So there's just tons of stuff to talk about. The offseason is usually this kind of dry spell of basketball, but it's not really right now because the end of June has had a lot going on. First and foremost, the NBA Finals came to a conclusion last month with Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics winning an NBA title. I will tell you, as a Milwaukee Bucks fan, it kind of hurt a little bit. It hurt, but it was nice to see Jrue Holiday win an NBA title because obviously, you know, back in September, 10 times out of 10, if you've got the opportunity to turn Jrue Holiday and former Blue Devil Grayson Allen into Damian Lillard, you do that, right? Like, obviously. And for years, my dream was to pair Damian Lillard with Giannis. I always thought it was a bit of a pipe dream, but it became a reality. And I love Jrue, and I hated that it had to end like that. But I'm happy for him for winning his second title. But it was a little bit of a dang, you know. And also, it's a little bit of a tough moment for me because Boston's one of Milwaukee's biggest rivals, and I've talked about this before. But being happy for Jason Tatum, but also angry at the Celtics is a double-edged. One edge is completely sharpened. The other one is more or less completely dull, right? Because it doesn't hurt me at all to see Jason Tatum winning an NBA title. It's quite the opposite. I'm so happy for him, and for the first time ever, a Duke Blue Devil was the best player on an NBA championship team. Now that kind of brings me to the next topic of discussion. Jason Tatum is the best player on that Boston Celtics team. I don't think that should be a debate. Jaylen Brown, however, did win Finals MVP. After the first couple games of this series, I tweeted something like, it seems like a foregone conclusion that Boston will win the title, but it seems like a long shot that Jason Tatum win Finals MVP, Jaylen Brown will win it. Now, that is what ended up happening, so I was right, but I don't think I should have been right. I think that the narrative was established far too early in that series. Tatum had a couple of games where he wasn't incredibly high scoring. And because of that, everybody sort of got on the train of, oh, well, Jaylen Brown is consistently performing. He's Boston's best player, right? And that's just not how it panned out over the next 3 games. You know, in game 1, Jaylen Brown had 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists. Jason Tatum had 16 points, 11 assists. Oh, is it 11 assists or 11 rebounds? 11 rebounds and 5 assists. So, I mean, honestly, that's not that far off, but I think it was an inefficient shooting performance. Jaylen Brown had the better game. Then he was 21, 7, and 4 for Brown in game 2 to 18, 9, and 12. So almost a triple-double with 12 assists from Tatum. In those first 2 games, I think, you know, just off efficiency, Jaylen Brown's got the edge on Tatum, but it's not a very big one. Then that next game comes up and it's 38 and 8 for Jaylen Brown. Then it's 31, 6, and 5 for Tatum. And it's like, okay, that's a fairly even repertoire. Next game is the game they lost. They got manhandled by Dallas. in game 4. And we saw a really sorry game, I think, from Jaylen Brown with just 10 points. Tatum had 15, 5, and 3. Not exactly a great game. But then in the closer, Tatum has a near triple-double with 31 points, 8 rebounds, 11 assists. 10 more points than Brown, who also had 8 rebounds and 6 assists. On the series, we're talking 20.8 points per game, 6 rebounds, 4.4 assists per game from Jaylen Brown. 1.4 more points per game from Tatum, 1.8 more rebounds per game, and 2.8 more assists per game. Jason Tatum is only like one of 6 or 7, I forget the exact number, but players all time to lead a championship team in the finals in points, assists, and rebounds. Nikola Jokic was one of them. He did so last year. And of those players to do that, Tatum is the only one to not bring down finals MVP. Now, people there will be some people that are like, just tell me you didn't watch the finals because Tatum looked horrible. Tatum didn't look as good as he could have. I think that's often the case in the playoffs, honestly. But to say that it's like, oh, look at the efficiency numbers, look at the shooting percentage numbers. Tatum shot better from 3, shot better from the line. He shot 5% less from the floor. Are we really going to withhold finals MVP from a guy because he shot 5% worse from the floor, but was better at literally everything else? Well, the other argument is defense. Well, Jaylen Brown, he's constantly guarding Luka. Tatum's not having to do that. Well, Luka was playing injured. And also, it's not like Jaylen Brown did that good of a job on him. Like he averaged over 30 points. That's honestly, that's like kind of the false kind of idea we get about primary defenders in the NBA. As a Bucks fan, in 2021, when they won that title in the second round, they had to go through the Brooklyn Nets. And so much praise is given to PJ Tucker for the job he did on Kevin Durant. And don't get me wrong, he slowed down Kevin Durant. He dogged Kevin Durant for 7 games. And he probably is a big reason why Durant airballed that final shot in overtime. He was just so tired after 7 games. But let's not sit here and pretend like PJ Tucker stopped him. Like Kevin Durant averaged like 35, 36 points a game on that series. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah, he was a good defender. He did a solid job, but like there's not a whole lot he really could do. Do I think Luka Doncic would have done less or more if Tatum had guarded him? Not really. I think Jason Tatum would have done pretty much the same job Jaylen Brown did, because Luka Doncic is just an out of this world player who's going to average that. So I'm not really going to give Brown that much credit for that. I think Luka was just going to get his on any defender that is a very capable one, in which I think both Brown and Tatum are capable defenders. I think he could have switched either onto him and the same thing would have happened. And so that's where I come at that discussion. I think just objectively speaking, Jason Tatum should have been the finals MVP. At the end of the day, I mean, mid-series, it was Jaylen Brown, but I think those last 2 games are what should have solidified Jason Tatum as the finals MVP. They didn't, because the narrative got established very early on in the series that Jaylen Brown was the finals MVP, and no one really cared to go back and retest that theory at the conclusion of the series, and they should have, because I think Jason Tatum genuinely got cheated out of a finals MVP. But while he did get cheated out of finals MVP, he did not get cheated out of a payday. Jason Tatum just re-signed a 5-year, I think, extension. Yeah, I think it's 5 years. And it is the largest contract in league history, a 5-year, I think $315 million contract, which boils down to roughly on average $63 million a year. Of course, he doesn't come away with $63 million after taxes and whatnot, but that is the largest contract ever signed in NBA history. So Jason Tatum just became a champion who led that championship team in the finals in points, rebounds, and assists. And he is now the highest paid player of all time. This is the kind of thing I think Duke fans dreamed of when they had to hear the rebuttals from Carolina fans about how, oh, they're the school that has Michael Jordan. They have James Worthy, Bob McAdoo, Vince Carter. Duke's got nothing, right? Duke's got nothing. The only all-stars they had, when the year 2010 came around was, Boozer, Christian Laettner was a one-time all-star. Back in like the 60s and 70s, you had Marin and Mullins with some all-star appearances. You had a couple thrown from Elton Brand. Well, now they have one of the best players in the world, Jason Tatum, who is a surefire Hall of Famer. Kyrie Irving, who I think is a first ballot Hall of Famer as well. They have Zion Williamson, who when healthy is one of the best players in the world. Paulo Banchero, who's one of the best young players in the world, an all-star in his second season. Brandon Ingram, who has an all-star appearance. RJ Barrett, who I still think has all-star upside, without a doubt, at a 20-point per game scorer now for like the last 3 seasons in a row. Not to mention Derek Lively, who was a starter on a team in the finals, doing quite well. And then I think that, they've got guys that are going to go into the NBA rather soon that have tremendous upside, like Cooper Flagg and Kaman Malawach. And so Duke in the NBA is just a bona fide unit at this point, right? And it's almost been the tides have completely turned. Carolina has very little to brag about in terms of NBA talent. Kobe White's pretty good. I think he should have been the most improved player in the NBA this season. He wasn't, but he's pretty good. Cole Anthony isn't bad. Harrison Barnes hasn't completely fizzled out. He's still a solid player. Cam Johnson's a good player. They've got some good players, but they don't have anyone elite. They have no elite players. And Duke has a starting 5 full of elite players right now in the NBA, as well as a handful of really good players, like rising talents like Jalen Johnson. There will be some Duke fans who don't want to own Jalen Johnson. They want to say he's not a Blue Devil, he quit. Sure, but you might want to own him in a couple years when he might be looking at an all-star appearance. That's all I'm going to say. So just some kind of crazy stuff going on for Duke in the NBA with Tatum becoming a champion. Also, let's dive into some of the new locations and stuff. So on NBA draft night, and I promise I'm getting into the NBA draft in just a minute. But actually, I think it might have been the day of the draft. It wasn't the night of the draft. AJ Griffin was traded by the Hawks to the Rockets for some picks. AJ Griffin, I've never seen a guy have such a solid rookie year, average 10 points per game as a rookie. Jalen Johnson has this breakout season and kind of surpasses AJ in rotation. And then AJ battles with injury, ends up not really playing much at all, averages 2 points per game. And just like that, Atlanta gives up on him and ships him out. They draft Zachary Reese-Hache, who I think is going to be one of the most underwhelming number 1 overall picks in NBA draft history, probably. I don't think he's a bad player. I just don't think that there's any way that he lives up to what we kind of see as number 1 player in the draft, which is he has to be a perennial all-star to live up to that. I think there's no way that happens. So they draft Reese-Hache. They have full faith in Jalen Johnson, even going as far to say that Jalen Johnson is the only guy that they are unwilling to trade. Even Trae Young they would be willing to move, but not Johnson. And so they've committed to those guys, and AJ Griffin falls to the wayside. And they're like, well, we'll just get rid of him for 2 picks. I mean, we're talking about a guy they took with the 16th pick in the draft just 2 seasons ago. And now they're already ready to just ship him off for second round picks in a bad draft at that. That's flabbergasting to me. I can't wrap my head around that. He dealt with injury. I think Houston got a steal. I think Houston is a team in a position to win right now. And I think AJ Griffin can help be a bench piece to make that happen right now. I think he's a very valuable player. Anytime you've got a player that can shoot over 40% from 3 and defend at a high level, why in the world are you shipping him off? I mean, it gave him no chance. Your 16th pick from 2 years ago gave him no chance. Speaking of giving no chances, I was really upset when Wendell Moore got drafted by Minnesota. He was a first-round pick. And again, after just 2 years, Wendell Moore shipped off for second-round picks on the day of the draft from Minnesota to Detroit. I was very upset that Wendell Moore got drafted to Minnesota when he did, because I knew that there was just no opportunity for him to break into the rotation. What with McDaniels and most notably Anthony Edwards in rotation for Minnesota at that same position, I just thought there's absolutely no way Wendell Moore breaks in. And if you know Wendell Moore and you look at the kind of player Wendell Moore is, he's not an incredibly assertive offensive player. He can set up offenses. He's not going to go just pound down and go get his shot every possession. He's not that kind of guy. And so when you're just making him the ultimate reserve and he played 25, 26 games this past season, even playing in a game in the Western Conference Finals. But when he comes in, it's for 5 minutes, and he's not a shot seeker. So he might be shooting once during that 5 minutes, maybe, if he even does. And he averaged less than a point per game because of that. I think Wendell Moore has to be given the reins in a second unit and told, you're going to have time on the floor to get the offense going. And then if a shot comes to you, which is a much more Wendell Moore style of offensive play, then it comes to you. There was no opportunity whatsoever for that to be a reality for Wendell Moore in Minnesota. He and Lexi Gordon have just recently announced that they're having a baby girl. So very happy, and congratulations to Wendell Moore Jr. And I'm very happy that he's landed in Detroit. Not because Detroit's a good team, actually quite the opposite. Detroit's a horrible team. And that's why I'm happy, because I think Wendell Moore needed to land on a horrible basketball team that would give him the proper minutes to where he can actually carve out a role and show other teams what he can do. And then maybe he can get a second contract. I'm worried about him getting a second contract. If things don't work out this year in Detroit, I don't know if he does get a second NBA contract. So this is a very pivotal year for Wendell Moore. I'm not as worried about AJ Griffin. Yes, he did have an off year in his second year, but his rookie year was very promising. I think Houston's a better location for him. I'm not as worried for AJ Griffin as I am for Wendell Moore, but I do think Detroit is a much better landing spot. I think both players are in better spots right now. Continuing on that kind of NBA free agency type stuff, well, the Hornets waived Seth Curry, but still probably working toward a deal on just a smaller value. A similar kind of thing for Luke Kennard. He hasn't been re-signed yet by the Grizzlies, but the thought process is that he will sign back on a smaller contract. He did sign a rather large one when he left Detroit. And so Kennard and Curry, not currently on contract, should be re-signed by the same team. There are a couple of, Mason Plumlee, first of all, has already found his new landing spot. He left the Clippers and signed with the Phoenix Suns in free agency to be a backup center for them, something that Phoenix needed. And Mason Plumlee will be entering his 12th year in the NBA, which is an extremely, extremely impressive feat. If Seth Curry does in fact re-sign with Charlotte, it'd be his 12th year as well, making I think 4 Duke players in double-digit years next year. It'd be Kyrie, Mason, Seth, and then the next guy I want to talk about, which is Tyus Jones. Washington has committed to some other point guard options, and it seems very unlikely that the Wizards want to re-sign Tyus Jones. I think Tyus Jones is maybe the most valuable backup point guard in the entire NBA, and any team would be foolish not to sign Tyus Jones. He's going to get a contract somewhere. He's such a valuable player and will be entering double-digit years in his career. Again, somehow he ended up being the most, long-lasting player from that 2015 team as an NBA player, which is, who would have thought? But Tyus Jones, love him, and he's going to find somewhere in free agency that's likely not returning to Washington. Speaking of players that'll find a place in free agency, and who knows, while I'm literally yapping right now, one of these guys might end up signing with the team while I'm saying something. Free agency is constantly moving, and in between when I edit this and when it comes out, who knows? But Gary Trent Jr., it seems unlikely that he will return to Toronto. So where's he going? The thing is, teams aren't willing to pay Gary Trent that mid-level exception price right now. He could still fetch $7-8 million in free agency, but then he could also take a lower amount and a larger role for a good team and kind of a prove it type season. I think of Malik Beasley last year as the Milwaukee Bucks starting shooting guard, took only $2 million after averaging 20 points per game just a few years prior. And it was kind of a prove it. Can you really do this on a good team? And he did well. And Malik Beasley's going to leave. And he's going to leave that starting 2 spot open. And I talk about the Bucks for a reason. I think Gary Trent would be perfect. Give Gary Trent, Bucks can't afford any more than a vet minimum for Gary Trent, but give him a prove it season. I think Gary's still a fantastic player, and I think he would fit perfectly with Milwaukee, especially next to Damian Lillard, who used to play with in Portland. So I think that would be an interesting team up.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network or DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
So I teased it for a while. Let's talk NBA draft. let's talk NBA draft. Coming into the night, I thought, well, first we got to see green room invites, Jared McCain, Kyle Filipowski. Coming into the night, I thought Jared McCain was going to get drafted by Miami to 15. It seemed all too right that the Heat would want another just ridiculously bonkers three-point shooter. And imagining Miami taking a guy who's already that good of a shooter and turning him into, I don't even know what, a 50% three-point shooter or something was terrifying to me. They didn't do it, but he did go with the very next pick. He went 16 to Philadelphia, which is an interesting pick, I think. An interesting atmosphere for Jared McCain, who I think saw some pushback from some non-open-minded Philly fans, which there are certainly some of. Not all Philly fans. I know some Philly fans. They're cool guys. But some are a little less open-minded. And so there was some pushback and about kind of Jared McCain's character and the kind of guy he is. Honestly, and I've been over this, if you're hating on Jared McCain for just having a beautiful, bubbly personality and just being himself, like, you need to go find a hobby, go reevaluate yourself. But Jared, just all smiles, great suit, great draft day outfit, man. Goes 16 to Philly. I think he'll work out well there as a sort of backup option to start. He'll be able to stretch the floor quite well with Joel Embiid and now Paul George as well in Philly, and kind of occupy that backcourt with Tyrese Maxey at times. It'll be an interesting fit. I really like Jared there, even though Philly is kind of one of Milwaukee's rivals a bit in the Eastern Conference. I like that fit there for Jared. I think it'll be interesting. And so let's with the Jared discussion out of the way, let's get into the I guess the elephant in the room. Draft night one. Well, the NBA draft got split into 2 days, pretty much just because the NBA wanted ESPN to be able to yap about, or ESPN wanted to be able to yap about Bronny for the entire second round of the draft. But they didn't want it to be annoying, so they split the 2 rounds to be like, oh, here, we'll give the flowers to the first round picks and we won't talk about Bronny today. And then tomorrow we're going to do a studio second round draft and just talk about Bronny for 3 hours. So that's what happened. And shockingly, and some people will say not shockingly, but shockingly, Kyle Filipowski fell out of the first round. People will say, oh, well, he's just weak. He blah, 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 defensive concerns. He's not that bad of a defender. Yes, his measurements were a little smaller than advertised, but I don't think they were that much worse. His skill as a 7-footer in this draft class, I mean, we're talking about a weak draft class, did not support him dropping out of the first round whatsoever. So Kyle Filipowski dropping out of those first 30 picks, especially falling out of that 30 slot in Boston, who I thought for sure would want to get a guy who was capable of being Al Horford's sort of replacement. And Al Horford kind of aging out, I thought this seems like a great pick. If you're Boston, they went for a slower, even less athletic guy with Baylor Shireman, who can shoot, no doubt. But Filipowski drops into the second round, ends up going 32 to Utah. And then we kind of realize some stuff. Well, first and foremost, it's not really, if you're like embedded in Duke basketball, if you're listening to this podcast, it might have been news to you that Kyle Filipowski's fiance was older than him, a decent amount older than him. We're talking 28 years old, his fiance's age to him at 20. And so this thing kind of blows up because Zach Lowe talks about it on his podcast. And apparently NBA teams, this was a consideration they had in their interviews with him, that he just seemed awkward around questioning about her, and that, that was a concern. And it's an odd one to me because I don't understand the not drafting the guy unless I just don't understand the severity, because there are players with way worse question marks on them who are being drafted comfortably in the first round or comfortably in the top 10 or, whatever. I mean, we're talking about like assault charges in the past, the things like that are sexual assault, stuff like that. And that's being almost just brushed under the rug, whatever. He's still a first round pick. But this is just a domestic, like, kind of oddity. But I mean, nothing illegal, nothing. It's just it's a relationship. It's an odd choice. It's an odd situation. There's no doubt. I don't, without kind of getting a little bit deeper into this whole thing, I don't know if I understand NBA teams passing on him as a first round pick. If that is really the reason, I don't know how much I buy it being the reason why he dropped out of the first round. I think maybe it became a convenient excuse to drop him out of the first round because they had their doubts about him defensively and is a consistent shooter and whatnot. So maybe it's just a convenient excuse, right? But it was sort of an odd break. Not totally surprising for some, but we can kind of see how maybe there were some locker room fission that we talked about during the season, maybe coming a little more into focus. I felt sad though to see, I saw Jared McCain there with his family and Jace and everybody at the draft and just full smiles, and Kyle, his family's not there. It's just his fiance, and he hugged Jared as Jared got drafted, and then he had to sit there the whole night undrafted. And because the NBA did the stupid 2-day draft, he has to sit and wait for 24 hours. He doesn't even show up at the ESPN studio draft like some of the other guys did. He just kind of has his own thing where it's seemingly, at least with the Duke men's basketball team pictures, it's just the coaching staff there. And John's wearing a Filipowski jersey shirt, and Mrs. Shire, Marcel, is wearing a flip shirt as well. And you can just tell how much Duke means to Kyle and how much Kyle meant to Duke. And I saw, and obviously if you've been following this, and you probably have, if you're on social media, there's the post from Kyle's mother and his brother Daniel, nothing from his twin brother Matt, but his brother Daniel talking about, how deep this thing goes. And there's all these little tidbits in the story that I really don't want to get into. I don't want to get into the personal stuff that's just being laid out by his family. I would really, really like to see a more in-depth reported piece on this before I get to talking about the rumored kind of this and that's been thrown around. I'm sure everybody kind of knows about it, and I don't want to throw speculation out there. There is a level of truth to all this, but I think there's some embellished parts as well. But there was something that his brother Daniel said about, Duke not doing anything, that this wouldn't have happened under Coach K. And it's like, well, I don't know what they can do, because it's a personal life decision, and young men often make questionable or difficult to understand life decisions. And we don't understand everything that's going into this situation. All we're hearing is the side of, Kyle's family, and we're not hearing it from anyone else. No one else is talking about this. I think it's crazy, and I think it says a lot to how Duke deals with media that they were able to keep all this kind of under wraps during the season. But I don't know what you want John Shire to do. Do you want John Shire to tell Kyle Filipowski to leave his relationship of however many years? I don't know if you can do that. He's a man. He's a young man. He's an adult man. And they make decisions, on their own. And the coaches can't hover over their lives. They dictate what's going on in the basketball court. And they can certainly be that rock to lean on, I think, for the players. But they can't go around telling them what to do in their lives. They can just hope to be a pillar to look up to and to lean on, but they cannot dictate what they do. And so I think it's unfair to place that burden upon John Shire and the coaching staff. I love Kyle. I've countless times defended Kyle Filipowski on this podcast, and I will do so again. I feel bad, and I feel bad for Kyle because of all the negative attention that he had throughout the season, and that he has especially now. I mean, that day ended up, he had to sit there and not get drafted on green room night. And then the next day, instead of just being able to focus on crap, I didn't go in the first round. It's now this whole thing blows up. And now it's not about it being your big day, your day that you become an NBA player. It's about this other thing in your personal life. And it has nothing to do with you as a basketball player anymore. And it's a tough situation, and it's a tough pill to swallow. I feel bad for Kyle. I hate that I've spent so much time talking about it, but I almost feel like, how can I not? Because it was such a hot button topic. I don't want to get too much into it in terms of the minute details and things like that, because of how little we've talked to everyone involved and how much speculation there is about this situation. And so that's where I'm going to leave that. What I will say is I'm incredibly happy for Kyle Filipowski being drafted by the Utah Jazz. I'm incredibly happy for Jared McCain being drafted by the Philadelphia 76ers. Duke adds 2 more players to the NBA. I'll talk more NBA contract stuff as it pans out. There won't be any large, well, there could be some large movement of Duke stars because Brandon Ingram's probably on the trading block, especially with DeJounte Murray coming into New Orleans. I got to think BI might be on his way out. So that Zion BI duo most likely will be broken up this summer, actually. So that's interesting. That's enough of that. I'll get more into NBA talk later in the summer. A couple more things before I end part 1 of the banter. We're talking Cooper Flagg was announced to be on the practice squad for the United States Olympic team. So he'll be playing against the official Olympic team, which Jason Tatum is on, of course, and which Grant Hill runs also. And so that's interesting. We get to see potentially another Olympic gold medalist in Tatum if the U.S. does, in fact, finish the job. And Grant Hill being the lead of U.S. basketball, a lot of Duke ties. But then Cooper Flagg at just 17 years old, being on that team is absolutely, or on that practice squad is absolutely extraordinary. Obviously, Kyrie Irving was on that team back in 2012, and he had a lot of breakout highlights and garnered a lot of respect from some NBA greats. And I think this is a really good opportunity for Cooper Flagg to garner a lot of respect at just 17 years old, being on that practice squad, going up against Jason Tatum, against LeBron James, against Durant and guys like that. It's going to be really, really good experience for Cooper Flagg. The team is all together right now and still is. And I'll talk a little more about that in part 2, but also who will be taken away in that kind of Olympic discussion. Cooper Flagg on the practice squad for the U.S., but also, and I've talked about it multiple times, Kaman Malawach for South Sudan. I'm looking forward to watching that. As I'm talking here, I think we've seen the conclusion of some of the qualifying games in Olympic pool play, which is always really fun. And Giannis is playing for Greece, and I've talked about Giannis a lot more than people normally do in Duke podcasts, but that's because of my Bucks fanship. But anyway, that's all of the first part and mostly an NBA-focused off-season banter. Thanks so much for listening, and I'm going to keep talking, and make sure you tune in Tuesday for part 2 of Banter. Thanks so much.